Welcome to Cultivated Live for Friday, May 24th. My name is Jay Rosenthal. I am the co-founder of Cultivated Media, the host of this program, Cultivated Live. And since we launched, our goal at Cultivated has been to be industry first, providing you, the cannabis industry, with the most important, insightful, useful, and timely information every day through our daily newsletter, which is Cultivated Daily. This program, Cultivated Live, which you are watching on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Jeremy's Twitter feed this morning. We'd love if you could subscribe to us on LinkedIn, follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe to us on YouTube, get your newsletter in the inbox every day. How to do that is all linked below in most of those places. I'm here with my co-founder, Jeremy Berke, and our editor-in-chief. Hey, Jeremy.
Hey, Jay. Good to be here. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you. We're talking New York again today because it's topical and timely, and we are with Freeman Klopott. Freeman, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction, but also let you do a little of an introduction. So you are a vice president at Marino, which is a PR communications firm. You're based in Albany. I think they're based in the city. You're also, and important to this conversation, the former director of communications for the New York State Office of Cannabis Management. Am I right so far?
You got it all.
Perfect. Before we jump into a piece that you wrote recently, give us a little bit of your background prior to the OCM, because I think it will help sort of frame the conversation we're going to have with you after you frame
it. Sure. So I like to think of myself as a former journalist, which I was. I started my career really in journalism, did that for about a decade, with my last stop being Bloomberg News, reporting on New York State politics based in Albany. And from there, I went to work in various
We lost him.
Landing spot. Oh, there he is. All right.
He's back.
The state dormitory. Am I here? Am I good?
Yeah, you were just getting to Albany when you dropped off.
Okay, so I was in Albany for reporting on state politics for Bloomberg News, and then my next stop, I kind of switched sides and went to work in communication leadership roles in New York State government. My first stop was the State Dormitory Authority, which is now become linked to the New York State cannabis story, at the time unrelated. And then from there, I went to work, led communications for the State Housing Agency. My longest stint was actually at the New York State Division of Budget, which is kind of like a central hub of state activity, and really overseeing the budget and how it's spent and how the agencies are operating. And I was there throughout COVID, which was quite an experience. And from there, I then went to help launch the Office of Cannabis Management as its first communications director. And I left about a year ago.
And so you said you left about a year ago.
Yep.
And recently, and Jeremy, I'll open it up to you after this. You published a piece, I think it was yesterday, titled New York's Cannabis Story, Dissed and Beaten, Still Rings True. I read it. I know a lot of people read it. Give us a little bit of sort of the background and thought to writing that piece, what you wrote and the timing of when you wrote it.
Sure. You know, what I was talking about there, and the timing and what I was talking about really all kind of flow together. Obviously there's a lot of turmoil in the New York State cannabis market. There has been for a while, but at the moment, we're seeing a lot of activity at the state level and in the government. The governor's recent report, and the executive director saying he's not going to seek a second term in that role in September. And I've been thinking a lot about how that really is impacting the story that we tell of what New York cannabis is. And when I set out to be the first communications director for OCM, really what I wanted to do was build kind of this messaging narrative platform around the state's really high level goals to lead with equity and build this equitable market, and use that to elevate the story of what we were doing in New York as something that was different, right? To define the New York market as something that was exceptional compared to other markets, and create value for the market participants, the businesses that are going to operate in that through that, right? What we know for sure is that cannabis consumers do care about where they're getting their product from, who made their product. They are a socially aware group of people, generally speaking, who want to participate in and support businesses that are led by people who have been impacted by prohibition. They want to support minority-led businesses. They want to support women-owned businesses. They find extra value in that. We've even found this going through. We did public education campaign while I was at OCM, and we did focus groups for it. And this is one of the things that came up repeatedly in those focus groups. So we know it's true. Right. And so what I wanted to do was build this platform that the businesses could tie into with their own messaging and elevate themselves along with the market, the New York market. And what we've really seen is a loss of that platform, right? As the program itself has really essentially come under attack, we've lost sight of what it's achieved. And that storyline. And I think if we can get back to that, right, if we can talk about successes that it's had, and despite all of the chaos, it has had successes, right? It is meeting the goals in the state's cannabis law to award 50% of licenses to equity applicants. And at the moment, right, we are seeing a lot of progress in the market. There's at every board meeting now, they're bringing 100 licenses across the different sectors, right? So, and we have over 100 dispensaries open, and they're opening now, almost weekly. You're seeing more open. So it is pointing in the right direction. The goals that it set out to achieve are being achieved. So what I wrote about was getting back to telling that story, reshaping it so that we're building again this international brand of New York cannabis that these companies can tie their own stories into and really thrive, particularly as we look at what's happening at the federal level and these inching steps closer to legality there. When you open up the market for competition, if you can define yourself as something different and bring that extra value, you're really going to set yourself up for long-term success.
So Freeman, on that narrative question, I really liked a line you wrote in the piece, and I shared it on Twitter yesterday. You say, whatever the word, it's clear we've lost the narrative, and in the end, that's harming the industry for the long term. How do we take that narrative back? I know you are outside of the Office of Cannabis Management now, but people are really looking at this and sort of indicting the idea of social equity as a core piece of cannabis legalization. And from what I'm hearing from you, you say that's the wrong tack to take here. So how do you sort of recapture that narrative, and what would you like to see both the state and the Office of Cannabis Management do that?
I think the place you have to start as, the Office of Cannabis Management in the state is celebrate the successes. Most of the story has revolved around it being a disaster, as the governor said earlier this year. And then this report comes out and tries to, describes it as, this mismanaged process and the wheels are coming off, right? We need to get back to talking about the success and the achievements of what the market's doing at the state level, and then at the outside of it in the private sector, what we can do to bolster that, right, is build a coinciding narrative that supports these successes and says, helps the state point back to what they're achieving, while remaining critical to make sure that things stay on track, right? That we don't have a backslide, that the investments that the governor's report talks about are actually followed through, and the hiring that the report suggests needs to happen, that happens, right? We need to balance those two things. But I think we all could do a better job inside and outside of government to highlight those successes and make sure that they're resonating going forward.
What was your, not to jump around too much, but what was your first take when the Office of General Services report came out? Did you think it was fair? Why or why not?
I think the findings in it were essentially accurate, right? The baseline findings, right? That there needs to be more hiring for licensing. There needs to be more hiring for enforcement. Those are key factors that the agency.
Do we lose him?
I think he's frozen. I think
Freeman, we lost you at key. We lost you at key factors. If you wouldn't mind rewinding 25 seconds.
New York in the country, so sometimes my internet is a little where'd you lose me?
You were saying the findings were generally correct, and then I think that's when we lost you.
All right, so the findings were generally correct, right? We had these hiring issues that need to be fixed. That talked about needing to hire more for enforcement, for licensing. There's no question. I mean, the hiring at the agency was an issue from the very beginning. The time it was taking to bring staff on. And that was ongoing when I left. And so that's true, right? They do need that support. As somebody who worked there, I thought it was a little odd, OGS leading this process because they're so involved. The Office of General Services, I'm sorry,
right.
That kind of oversaw the report. It has a lot of connections with running the agency. They do handle HR, they handle its contracting. But the biggest thing I took away was a hope, right? A hope that this report leads to further action, that the issues that the agency has been facing will now be tackled. They're getting the attention that they need from all levels of government, and hopefully it leads to investment at OCM.
And not to rehash the report entirely, but you've sort of rightly pointed out, a few issues as you saw them from within the OCM, in terms of difficulties onboarding staff, the sort of headline number that the OCM underspent its budget. Could you kind of walk us through your perspective on those questions? Maybe starting with the onboarding question.
Sure. And I think, the OCM did put out a letter this week to the legislature, and I think they did a good job of kind of highlighting their perspective, right? And it talks about how, the report mentions these 13 job slots, jobs that weren't filled for licensing, and the OCM pushes back and says, we were mandated to staff up enforcement, and we had a cap on the number of positions that we could fill from the Division of Budget, which just happens to be where I used to work. And that rings true. I think there are different pressures the government's always trying to respond to, and over since the agency started, enforcement's been one of the most pressing needs, right? And it's an enormous thing to tackle, and you need that attention there. Obviously, it sounds like they were getting pushed in different directions while they're trying to assess the licensing. While I was there, it certainly took a long time to onboard staff. I did the job for 6 months by myself, and eventually filled out a team of 7 people to support me. But that was exhausting, and everybody was in a similar boat. Those early days where we didn't have staff to support us, so the senior leadership was wearing a lot of hats, is what we'd like to say. And you would do.
Let's see if he comes back.
We got him wearing hats. There we go. Yeah. We had you wearing lots of
hats.
Hats, yeah.
We all wore lots of hats, and you get tired. Yeah. It's a lot of work launching an agency, launching an industry simultaneously, and it was exhausting. And I think when you get behind in hiring, it's hard to overcome that.
I want your perspective on, given your long career, in across journalism and in government, how normal or predictable were some of these challenges at the beginning, right? In my perspective, legalizing cannabis is hard. Dealing with Albany and New York State politics and, agency divisions is even harder. Centering social equity, given all those challenges in a place like New York, where there is just such a huge market, so much money, and just a regulatory hornet's nest, was the OCM biting off more than it could chew at the beginning? And was this destined to be tumultuous? Or do you think that there was a path to being successful from the start?
Look, I think if you look at every market opening, right, they're all pretty much tumultuous in some level.
Right.
I mean, the smoothest ones might be the ones that, which is the majority, that do go to just, take their medical and spin it out into adult use. But even they run into bumps, right?
Right.
And they gave all this power to the local governments to overrule everything. So like, that structure isn't working great. Everybody's had their problems trying to launch a new industry. And every state, regardless of how much they've paid attention to it, has been under pressure to do something on the equity front. Because the legalization movement was based on fixing these problems, right? You don't get to legalization without the it's really a criminal justice fight at its core, right? So you don't get to legalization without that fight. And those people backing it. And so you're always launching in this country a market in that context. And so you're always dealing with those pressures. New York certainly has tried to do it in a very different way. And it was carving its own path, which is always more difficult. There was no roadmap to follow here. And so, it's a lot. And you as soon as you start getting little delays in the process, right, there's the law passes and it's 6 months before there's agency, people appointed to the agency and the Cannabis Control Board. And that kind of compounds on you. So it is hard. And I think out of the gate, if things could have been a little different with some more intention on building the agency a little faster. But you have to remember the context too, right? The governor is coming in, the previous governor had just resigned. She's coming in, setting up her own team to run New York State government while launching this agency. There's a lot there too, right? So I think, the timing of all of that made it more difficult than it might have been in different circumstances.
And then one more question, looking back, how did you view some of the lawsuits that came out, right? I mean, I think I'm not a lawyer and my perspective is just amateurish at best, but contained within the lawsuits maybe were some good ideas about fairness, about who could get these licenses and why. At the same time, there was clearly outside corporate interests who wanted to change the whole program in their favor. And that led to an injunction that was good for nobody. What was that like through your lens, just seeing these lawsuits come out, and how do you respond to these situations?
I was there when the original injunction came in on the card program. It was frustrating from the inside. I mean, there's no question. It was very frustrating. We felt like we were kind of hitting our stride and we had things lined up. It was a little scary, right? You have all these farmers growing product and now you can't open stores for them to sell it. So, you're worrying about all of that, but you also have to understand and recognize, right, that that's our country. I mean, our system is, for good or ill, is moderated by lawsuits, really, right? And that's how we do business in America is through litigation, really, and that's how we have checks and balances on things. And so, as somebody who has put a chunk of his life into public service, you have to constantly do that in a number of situations, constant situations, right? That you have to think about, okay, well, this is pissing me off as an individual because I've put my heart and soul into whatever this is, and somebody from the outside's coming and just crapping on it through litigation, through the press, whatever it is. And you have to then kind of search for the meaning and find the value, and so you remind yourself, hey, this is the process that I put myself into. I have to understand that this is what's going to happen, and you have to kind of balance your mental health that way.
Sure.
Freeman, so we've done a look back both on your career, but also sort of your time at OCM and even up to now. But what do you think about well, you talked about the report, but changes being made, implemented, if they're done well, where do you think the industry in New York will be 6, 9, 12 months from now, barring anything barring more lawsuits, I guess?
I think, really barring more lawsuits, and assuming the investments described in that report are made and the hiring is executed at OCM, and things stay on the same trajectory, or even as a result of further investments expand more becomes more expansive. I think we're going to see it in a year, a booming market here. Even with I can't imagine the illicit market is somehow tamped out in a year, but we're starting to see some of these new enforcement tools that
He was going to say local governments implementing. No, I'm just kidding. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think that's what he's going to say.
Local government, where they're really, it was local governments implementing.
Yeah,
I
that
knew
they're
it.
doing it. You were right. It's funny. I can hear you.
That's weird. Okay.
You see it a lot. You see New York City really taking that on, and shutting these places down. Padlocks are all over the place in the city, and that's a good thing. I do think it will shrink the illicit market. I don't think you ever obviously will wipe it out completely, but I do think a year from now we are looking at hundreds of dispensaries open, and sales through the roof. As the trick will be keeping everything in balance, and that I think we see in every market too, as they're starting up, is how do you maintaining supply and demand, which it seems to be something the agency is trying to do, but that's hard to do. It's a plant. How much is going to grow? How much can you make out of it? It's complicated and it's not easy. It's an agricultural product, and you see that in mature agricultural markets that there's oversupply and undersupply and prices move. So we'll see some of that. We'll see some of those market hiccups along the way, I'm sure. Some of them might really benefit consumers too. I mean, if there's oversupply and it gets really cheap, I mean, as a consumer, that's great.
Careful what you wait for. That inevitably does happen. It is good for consumers who like Jeremy to buy less expensive cannabis in New York City, but it is a challenge to markets because people
absolutely. Oh yeah.
It's built off. Talked about the farmers earlier. It becomes a real challenge for them, but it is this balance. And you're correct. Like some of these things are not unique to New York. They happen in every growing market. It's just, and I think you understand. Like it was looking at it from an outsider's perspective, not both of your insiders' perspective, being in New York, but like the pace has been the real challenge. Just to watch it unfold slowly is watching it unfold slowly.
Right.
It's like watching grass grow,
Yes, or not weed, but grass.
Grass. Yeah.
Freeman, let me give you a broad, forward-looking question to kind of end things here. Other states that want to look to New York's example and center social equity, whatever jurisdiction states, whatever's legalized, want to center social equity in the process. What should they learn from the entire past 3 years of this?
I think one of the biggest lessons is you have to move quickly in setting things up, or you have to figure out the key. Nobody's unlocked this mystery of how you legalize weed and stop arresting people for it and stop the growth of an illicit market before you have legal sales. Nobody's cracked that nut yet. I think Ohio is looking at keeping it illegal until the first store opens. Maybe that's the answer. It feels a little funny to me to be arresting people in the interim months of building regulations while it's like, that feels weird. I think that feels weird to most people. That's why it doesn't happen. So I think that's one of the big lessons is, and I don't know the answer, but we got to figure out how you launch a market in this atmosphere and not let an illicit market just blossom while you're doing it. And then I think you have to, and I also don't know the answer here, but like the lawsuit piece of it, right? We see New York and other states, there's always these lawsuits, there's injunctions on different, and then maybe not the whole market like New York was, but different pieces, especially when you start dealing with how are you going to do this equitably. You see these disruptive lawsuits. So how do you prepare for that? How do you try to build regulations in a way that really considers all of those potential lawsuits and how you can kind of construct them in a way to defend better against that is going to be key. But also, I think one of the big positive lessons, you have to stick to your guns too. If you want to have an equitable market, you have to keep driving on that. And I think, one of the things we see right now is kind of a rallying around, OCM's executive director, Chris Alexander, because he was mission driven on that front, right? He was unrelenting in his focus on equity being the way New York was going to do this. And because of that, despite the lawsuits, New York is in this position I described at the beginning where it is hitting these goals, these lofty goals set in the state's cannabis laws for equity. And so you have to have, that mission driven focus at the top and that desire, or you're going to crumble when you hit that first roadblock.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jay, I think that's a good place as any to leave it.
It's a good place to end. And Freeman, I want to say, we'd love to have you back, of course, as our show unfolds and as cannabis in New York continues to unfold. Thank you for your time. Looking forward. Have a good, safe, long weekend, both of you. And that is our program today. That's been Cultivated Live. We encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter at cultivated.news. It's right there. Everywhere you're watching, there's a link to it in the show notes. Monday, we will be off. Tuesday, we will be back with Joanne Caceres from Denton's. We're going to be talking federal policy and maybe even a little bit of capital markets, because someone from Denton's did chime in on that, what they expect to happen with NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange. And I'll hint, it's not much as it relates to cannabis and Schedule 3. So thank you so much for joining us here this week. Remember, both Freeman and Jeremy, when you're in New York, buy cannabis from your local dispensary. I will do the same, I promise. Everybody have a good long weekend, and we will see everybody on Tuesday.